I never thought a $20 fine would destroy an entire neighborhood, but that's exactly what happened in Meadowbrook Commons, Minnesota. My name is Frank Brennan, and I've been living in this suburban Minneapolis development for 3 years. I'm a diesel mechanic by trade, which means I know my way around engines better than most people know their own homes. I drive a 2019 Ford F-250 diesel truck that I bought used 2 years ago. It's been reliable, well-maintained, and perfect for hauling my tools and equipment to various job sites around the Twin Cities area. The only quirk about diesel engines, especially in Minnesota winters, is that they need to warm up properly before you drive them. It's not optional. It's mechanical necessity. On January 15th, I walked out to my driveway at 6 in the morning like I always did. The temperature had dropped to negative 12 degrees overnight, and frost covered every surface in sight. I started my truck and let it idle in the driveway while I went back inside to grab my thermos and lunch bag. This was my routine. 5 to 7 minutes of warming, depending on the temperature. Any diesel owner in a cold climate will tell you the same thing. You don't just start a cold diesel and drive off unless you want to destroy your engine and void your warranty. I came back out 6 minutes later, scraped the last bit of ice off my windshield, and headed to work. That afternoon, I found a letter in my mailbox from the Meadowbrook Commons Homeowners Association. Inside was a notice of violation and a $20 fine for excessive vehicle idling in violation of community noise ordinances and environmental standards. I read it 3 times, certain there had to be some mistake. The letter was signed by Patricia Whitmore, the HOA president, and it cited Section 12, subsection 4 of the community rules. No resident shall idle any vehicle for more than 3 minutes between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. I had never seen this rule before. I pulled out my copy of the HOA regulations from when I bought the house. I flipped through every page twice. There was no Section 12, subsection 4. The rules document only had 9 sections total. Someone had added new regulations without properly notifying the homeowners. The next morning, I did the same thing. Started my truck, let it warm up, went to work. That evening, another letter. Another $20 fine. This one had a photograph attached, showing my truck in my driveway with exhaust visible in the cold air. The timestamp reads 6:04 a.m. I called the number listed on the HOA letterhead and got Patricia Whitmore's voicemail. I left a calm, professional message explaining that diesel engines require warm-up time in cold weather and that I hadn't received notice of any new rules. I requested a meeting to discuss the situation. She called back 2 hours later. Her voice was sharp and nasal, with that particular tone some people get when they've decided they are right before the conversation even starts. Mr. Brennan, the rules are very clear. 3 minutes maximum for idling. Mrs. Whitmore, I never received notification of this rule. It's not in my original HOA documents. We updated the regulations last October. There was a notice in the monthly newsletter. I never got a newsletter in October, or any month actually. That's not my problem. The rules apply to all residents, regardless of whether they choose to read their mail. I'm not choosing to ignore anything. I'm telling you I never received it. And more importantly, diesel engines need more than 3 minutes to warm up in sub-zero temperatures. It's a mechanical requirement, not a preference. Mr. Brennan, I don't care what kind of engine you have. The rule exists for a reason. Other residents have complained about noise and pollution. Who complained? That information is confidential. Can we at least meet to discuss this? Maybe I can provide some documentation about diesel engine requirements. There's nothing to discuss. You've been fined. You can appeal in writing, but I should tell you that no appeals have been successful in the past 2 years. She hung up before I could respond. I paid the 2 fines because I didn't want the situation to escalate, but I also started doing research. I pulled up the Minnesota state laws regarding HOA regulations and rule changes. According to state statute, any changes to HOA rules must be submitted to all homeowners in writing at least 30 days before taking effect. A mention in a newsletter that half the residents never received didn't meet that standard. I also discovered something interesting while talking to my neighbors. I lived on Oakmont Drive, which formed a rough circle with about 42 houses. Most of my neighbors were middle-aged professionals, a few retirees, and several young families. Over the next few days, I casually brought up the HOA fines in conversation with people I ran into. Greg Martinez, who lived 4 houses down, told me he'd been fined $50 for parking his boat in his driveway for more than 48 hours. The old rules said 1 week was fine. Linda Thompson got fined for having the wrong color mailbox. The original rules specified neutral colors, but the new version demanded black or bronze only. She'd had a gray mailbox for 6 years without issue, but here's what really caught my attention. During these conversations, at least 8 different neighbors mentioned that they'd had car trouble over the past few months. Dead batteries, mostly, and several of them mentioned that I'd helped them out. That was true. I'd been jump-starting people's cars all winter. Minnesota cold is brutal on batteries, and a lot of people don't realize their battery is dying until they try to start their car on a -20 morning and get nothing but clicking sounds. I kept jumper cables in my truck, and I'd helped probably a dozen neighbors since December. It took 5 minutes, cost me nothing, and it was just being a decent human being. Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher in her 70s, had called me twice when her Buick wouldn't start. The Ramirez family down the street, both parents working early shifts, had needed help one morning when both their cars decided to die simultaneously. Young couple, 2 kids under 5, already running late. I got them going in 10 minutes. On January 19th, I got my 3rd fine. Still $20, but the letter now included a warning that continued violations will result in increased penalties and potential lien action against your property. That was when I decided I was done being accommodating. I sent a certified letter to Patricia Whitmore and the HOA board. In it, I detailed the legal requirements for rule changes in Minnesota, pointed out that the regulation update hadn't followed proper procedure, and formally disputed all 3 fines. I included printed documentation about diesel engine warm-up requirements from Ford, several mechanic associations, and even a statement from my truck's warranty information stating that failure to properly warm the engine in cold weather could void the warranty. I also started my truck at exactly 6 a.m. every morning and idled it for precisely 7 minutes. I timed it, I documented it, and I waited. The response came 5 days later, not from Patricia but from the HOA's lawyer. The letter stated that my appeal had been denied, that the fine stood, and that I now owed an additional $100 fine for frivolous appeals. Furthermore, if I continued idling my vehicle in violation of community standards, the fines would increase to $50 per incident. That was $61 in total, but it was the principle that made my blood pressure spike. They weren't even pretending to care about facts or fairness anymore. I paid the fines. All of them. I didn't want them to have any legitimate claim against my property. But I also made a decision that morning. I was done doing favors for people who lived in a community run by someone who treated homeowners like subjects instead of neighbors. The next incident happened on January 27th. It was a Wednesday, and the temperature had dropped to -18 overnight. I was in my garage around 7 a.m., organizing some tools before work, when I heard the distinctive sound of a car engine failing to turn over. That rapid clicking, that means a dead battery. I glanced out and saw Donald Parker, 3 houses down, standing next to his Lexus SUV in his driveway, phone pressed to his ear. He looked frustrated. He saw me looking and raised his hand in a wave. I jump-started his car once before, back in December. I waved back, then went into my house. 10 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. Donald stood there, breath fogging in the frigid air. "Hey, Frank, sorry to bother you, but my car won't start. I think it's the battery. Do you have a few minutes to give me a jump? I've got to get to work." "Sorry, Donald. I'm pretty busy this morning." "Oh, okay. It'll only take a minute, though. I know you've got the cables." "I do, but I'm running late myself. Maybe try calling roadside assistance." His face fell. "That'll take at least an hour. I've got a meeting at 8:30. "Sorry, man. I really can't help today." I closed the door gently but firmly. Through the window, I watched him make a phone call, presumably to his workplace, then another, probably to a towing service. He was still waiting in his driveway when I left for work 20 minutes later. I felt a small twinge of guilt, but it faded when I remembered the HOA's threatening letter sitting on my kitchen counter. 3 days later, Mrs. Henderson called me. I saw her name on my caller ID and almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Frank, dear, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my car won't start again. I have a doctor's appointment at 11, and I was wondering if you might have time to help me out." This one was harder. Mrs. Henderson was genuinely kind, always friendly, never caused problems for anyone. But she was also on the HOA board. Not the president, but she attended the meetings. She voted on the decisions. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm actually not able to help with that anymore." "Oh, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I'm just not offering that service anymore." There was a pause. "Service? Frank, I don't understand. You've helped me before." "I know, and I'm sorry, but circumstances have changed. You might want to call AAA or a local mechanic. But that will cost money and take so much time. You're right there, and it only takes a few minutes." "I understand it's inconvenient, but I really can't help. I'm sorry." I hung up feeling worse than I had with Donald, but I didn't change my mind. Over the next 2 weeks, 4 more neighbors contacted me about dead batteries. 2 knocked on my door, 1 called, 1 caught me in my driveway as I was leaving for work. I turned them all down politely but firmly. Word started to spread. Frank Brennan, the guy who used to help everyone with their car problems, wasn't helping anymore. I could feel the shift in the neighborhood. A few people gave me cold looks. Someone left a note on my windshield calling me selfish. But most people just seemed confused. I didn't explain myself to anyone. It wasn't their business. On February 10th, I got another fine in the mail. $20 for idling my truck. I'd been warming it up for exactly 7 minutes every morning, just like always. I paid the fine the same day and documented everything. The February HOA meeting was scheduled for the 15th. It was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that mostly got used for garage sale organization and the occasional birthday party rental. I'd never attended one before, but I decided it was time. About 30 people showed up, which was apparently high turnout. Most meetings drew maybe 15 residents, according to Greg Martinez, who I sat next to. Patricia Whitmore sat at a table at the front of the room with 4 other board members, including Mrs. Henderson, who wouldn't make eye contact with me. Patricia was exactly what I'd pictured from her phone voice. Mid-50s, short blonde hair with aggressive highlights, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my truck payment. She had that specific posture of someone who's used to being in charge and enjoys it a little too much. She called the meeting to order and started going through routine business. Budget reports, landscaping contracts, a discussion about the pool schedule for the upcoming summer. I waited. Finally, she opened the floor for resident comments. I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Brennan." Her voice could have frozen water faster than the Minnesota winter. I stood up. "I want to address the vehicle idling fines I've received. I've submitted documentation showing that diesel engines require adequate warm-up time in cold weather. I've also pointed out that the rule change wasn't properly communicated to residents according to state law. I'm formally requesting that the board rescind these fines and revise the rule to account for mechanical necessities. Your request has already been denied, Mr. Brennan. We've moved on." With respect, Mrs. Whitmore, I'm bringing it up again because the issue hasn't been resolved. The rule as written is unreasonable and potentially illegal. A man I didn't know, one of the other board members, spoke up. "Mr. Brennan, the rule exists because we've had complaints about noise and pollution. Your truck produces significant exhaust, especially in cold weather. It's disruptive to neighbors who are still sleeping." "Who complained?" I asked again. "That's confidential," Patricia said. "Then how do I know the complaints are legitimate? How do I know anyone actually complained?" Patricia's face flushed red. "Are you accusing this board of lying?" I'm asking for transparency. If my vehicle is genuinely bothering someone, I'd like to know who and try to work it out directly. But I suspect there weren't any complaints. I suspect this is about control, not community standards. The room got very quiet. A few people shifted in their seats. Greg muttered, "Oh damn," under his breath next to me. "Mr. Brennan, you're out of order. Sit down." I'm a homeowner asking legitimate questions at a community meeting. I have every right to speak. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have you removed. By who? Are you going to call the police because I'm asking questions? Another board member, a thin man in his 60s, stood up. Maybe we should take a short break and discuss this privately with Mr. Brennan. There's nothing to discuss, Patricia snapped. The fines stand. Mr. Brennan, you have two choices. Follow the rules or continue paying fines. Eventually, if you accumulate enough violations, we can place a lien on your property. That's how HOAs work. That's how abusive HOAs work, I said. Reasonable ones actually listen to their residents. Patricia stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. This meeting is adjourned. You can't just end the meeting because you don't like what someone's saying. But she was already gathering her papers. The other board members looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict her. Within 2 minutes, she and 3 of the board members had left. Mrs. Henderson remained, looking miserable. Several neighbors came up to me after. A few expressed support. More just seemed uncomfortable with the confrontation. One woman, Sarah Chen, who lived on the opposite end of the circle, told me she'd been fined 3 times for having her trash cans visible from the street on non-collection days. "I work 12-hour shifts at the hospital," she said. "Sometimes I don't get home until after dark, and I forget to bring them in immediately. The old rule said you had until the next morning. The new one says they have to be stored out of sight within 2 hours of collection. It's impossible for people with my schedule." "Did you appeal?" "Twice." "Both denied. I just pay the fines now. It's easier than fighting." That seemed to be the common attitude. The HOA had created an environment where it was easier to comply than resist, even when the rules were unreasonable. I went home that night angry but also thoughtful. I'd made my point, but Patricia wasn't going to back down. She'd rather burn the whole neighborhood down than admit she was wrong. The next morning, February 16th, I started my truck at 6 a.m. and let it idle for 7 minutes. At 6:15, I drove to work. When I got home that evening, there was a fine notice waiting, $20, but there was also a note stuck to my door, handwritten, anonymous. Some of us appreciate you standing up to Patricia. Keep fighting. Over the next week, something interesting started happening. I noticed several other people warming up their cars longer than 3 minutes. Greg Martinez started idling his Honda CR-V for a solid 5 minutes every morning. The Thompsons, who had 3 cars, started warming up all of them. Even Mrs. Henderson, I noticed, was taking her time with her Buick. Fines started multiplying across the neighborhood. Greg told me he got 2 in 1 week. Linda Thompson got 3. People started talking about it, and not quietly. At the grocery store, at the gas station, in driveways and front yards, the HOA had gone too far, and people were getting fed up. On February 23rd, Donald Parker knocked on my door. His Lexus had a new battery now, I'd noticed. He looked embarrassed. "Frank, I wanted to apologize. I heard about what happened at the HOA meeting. I didn't realize Patricia was hassling you like this." "It's fine, Donald." "It's not fine. And I get why you didn't help me with my car that day. I would have done the same thing. I appreciate that. For what it's worth, a bunch of us are organizing. We're collecting signatures for a special meeting to recall Patricia from the board. We need 20% of homeowners to trigger it. We're almost there." That caught my attention. "How many signatures do you need?" 63. "We have 58 confirmed. We're going door to door this weekend. Count me in." They got the signatures by Sunday evening. The recall petition was submitted on Monday, February 26th. According to HOA bylaws and Minnesota state law, the board had to schedule a special meeting within 30 days. Patricia's response came in the form of a neighborhood-wide letter on March 1st. In it, she claimed that a small group of malcontents were trying to undermine the HOA's important work. She listed all the improvements made under her leadership: new landscaping contracts, updated playground equipment, successful community events. She painted herself as a dedicated volunteer being attacked by ungrateful residents. She didn't mention the fines, the rule changes, or the lack of proper notification. The special recall meeting was scheduled for March 18th at 6 p.m. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Commons got increasingly tense. Patricia's supporters, and she did have some, became more vocal. They left flyers arguing that the HOA needed strong leadership and that removing Patricia would lead to chaos and declining property values. The opposition, which now included about half the neighborhood, circulated their own information. Spreadsheets showing the dramatic increase in fines over the past year. Testimonials from residents who felt harassed. Comparisons to other HOAs in the area with more reasonable rules. I kept warming up my truck every morning. I kept getting fined. By mid-March, I'd accumulated 8 total fines, costing me $160. I paid every single one and kept detailed records, and I still wasn't jump-starting anyone's car. On March 10th, the temperature dropped again, a late winter cold snap that caught everyone off guard. -6 degrees, unusual for that time of year. That morning, I counted 4 different neighbors trying to start their cars unsuccessfully. 2 of them looked toward my house. One even started walking up my driveway before apparently thinking better of it and turning back. Mrs. Henderson called me again. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Frank." Her voice was tired. "I'm not calling to ask for help with my car. I'm calling to apologize." "Okay." I should have spoken up at the board meetings. I knew Patricia was being unreasonable with these fines, especially yours. I knew the rule changes weren't handled properly, but I didn't say anything because it was easier not to. "I'm sorry." I sat down on my couch. I appreciate that, Mrs. Henderson. I'm voting for the recall. I'm going to speak at the meeting too. It's time someone from the board acknowledged what's been happening. That takes courage. It's just honesty, dear, something we should have had more of months ago. After we hung up, I felt a small shift in my perspective. This wasn't about Patricia versus me anymore. It was about an entire community trying to figure out how to live together reasonably. The day of the recall meeting arrived with unusual weather. 52 degrees, sunny, all the snow melting into streams running down the gutters. It felt symbolic somehow, like the neighborhood was thawing out. The community center was packed. Every chair filled, people standing along the walls, some folks even waiting outside. Easily over 100 people, which was remarkable for a neighborhood of 250 homes. Patricia sat at the front table with her lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. The other 4 board members sat separately, off to the side. A professional mediator, required by the bylaws for recall proceedings, managed the meeting. The format was straightforward. Those in favor of the recall would present their case. Patricia would defend herself. Then a vote. Simple majority of attending homeowners required for removal. Donald Parker spoke first, laying out the timeline of increasing fines, the improper rule changes, and the lack of transparency. He had charts, printed documentation, everything organized professionally. He worked in project management, and it showed. Sarah Chen spoke about the impact on working families, how the rigid rules didn't account for real-life schedules and challenges. Greg Martinez talked about the erosion of community trust, how neighbors were turning on each other instead of supporting one another. Then Mrs. Henderson stood up. The room went silent. "I've served on this board for 6 years," she began. "I've worked with 3 different presidents. Patricia Whitmore is the only one who treated this position as a dictatorship rather than a service. I take responsibility for not speaking up sooner. I watched her implement policies that hurt our neighbors, and I stayed silent because I didn't want the conflict. That was wrong. I'm voting for this recall, and I'm resigning from the board effective immediately regardless of the outcome." She sat down. Several people started clapping. Patricia's face had gone from red to almost purple. When it was her turn to speak, she stood up slowly, deliberately. "I have given 3 years of my life to this community," she said. "Unpaid volunteer work, countless hours managing problems you never see. Do you know how many violations I deal with every week? How many complaints I field? How many difficult decisions I have to make? Maybe if you stopped creating violations, you'd have less work," someone called out. The mediator intervened. "Please, let Mrs. Whitmore speak without interruption." Patricia continued. "I implemented these rules because this community was becoming chaotic. Cars parked everywhere, noise at all hours, property values at risk. Someone has to maintain standards. If you remove me, you'll realize within 6 months how much I was protecting you from." "Protecting us from what?" Greg asked. "From being reasonable human beings. From turning into one of those neighborhoods where anything goes, where houses fall into disrepair and values plummet." I raised my hand. The mediator recognized me. "Mrs. Whitmore, did anyone actually complain about my truck idling? That's confidential. It's a yes or no question." Her lawyer whispered something to her. She shook her head. "I'm not required to disclose that information." "I'll take that as a no," I said. "Which means you created a rule to target me specifically, then tried to enforce it community-wide to make it seem legitimate. That's not protecting property values. That's harassment. I don't have to listen to these accusations." "Actually," the mediator said, "you do. This is a formal proceeding. All parties have the right to speak." Patricia sat down hard, arms crossed. The mediator called for the vote. Paper ballots, counted publicly, verified by 3 neutral residents from a different section of the neighborhood who'd volunteered as observers. The result was 92 in favor of recall, 31 opposed, 4 abstentions. Patricia Whitmore was removed as HOA president effective immediately. She stood up, gathered her papers, and walked out without a word. Her lawyer followed, looking relieved to be done with the whole situation. The mediator then facilitated an emergency election for interim president. Mrs. Henderson had resigned, leaving 4 board members. They needed to appoint someone temporarily until a proper election could be held in 60 days per the bylaws. Donald Parker was nominated and accepted unanimously by the remaining board. His first act as interim president was to propose an immediate moratorium on all fines issued in the past 6 months, pending a complete review of the rules and how they were implemented. The motion passed with overwhelming support from the attending residents. The meeting finally ended around 9 p.m. People lingered, talking, some clearly happy, others processing what had just happened. A few of Patricia's supporters left quickly, looking uncomfortable. I was walking to my truck when Mrs. Henderson caught up with me. "Frank, thank you for standing up. I know it cost you money and stress. I'm just glad it worked out. Will you consider joining the board? We'll have openings after the next election." "I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll stick to fixing engines. Less complicated," she laughed. I can't argue with that. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The next morning, March 19th, I started my truck at 6 a.m. and let it idle for 7 minutes. No one complained. No fine appeared in my mailbox, but something else did happen. Around 7:30 a.m. there was a knock on my door. Donald Parker stood there with his wife and 2 kids. "Hey, Frank, our Lexus won't start. I know you stopped helping with this, and I completely understand why, but I wanted to ask if maybe, now that things have changed, you might reconsider." I grabbed my jumper cables. "Let's get you started." It took 5 minutes. His battery was on its last legs, needed replacing, but the jump got him going. His wife thanked me profusely. The kids, maybe 7 and 9 years old, thought the whole process was fascinating. "How much do we owe you?" Donald asked. "Nothing. It's what neighbors do." Over the next week, I helped 4 more people with dead batteries. Mrs. Henderson needed a jump on March 22nd. I was there in 3 minutes. The Ramirez family had alternator problems on March 24th. I diagnosed it, explained what they needed, and recommended a good shop that wouldn't overcharge them. The neighborhood started feeling like a community again, instead of a collection of people afraid of stepping out of line. The board review of the rules took about 3 weeks. They formed a committee of 7 residents with various professional backgrounds: lawyer, engineer, teacher, small business owner, retired judge, nurse, and a stay-at-home parent. They went through every rule change Patricia had implemented or modified in the past 3 years. Their report, published on April 9th, was damning. 27 rule changes had been made without proper notice. 14 rules contradicted Minnesota state law or the original HOA charter. 8 rules were deemed unnecessarily restrictive with no clear benefit to the community. The committee recommended rescinding or revising 34 total provisions. The vehicle idling rule was completely eliminated. The new version simply said residents should be considerate of noise levels during early morning and late evening hours, with no specific time limits. Trust residents to be reasonable rather than mandating strict compliance. All fines issued under the improperly implemented rules were voided. I got a check for $160 in mid-April. So, did dozens of other residents who'd been fined for various violations. The regular HOA election happened in late April. Donald Parker ran for president officially and won easily. Mrs. Henderson decided not to run again, saying she wanted to enjoy retirement without the stress. 3 new board members were elected, all running on platforms of transparency and reasonable governance. One of them was Sarah Chen, the hospital nurse. She brought a practical, problem-solving approach that the board desperately needed. Patricia Whitmore moved out of Meadowbrook Commons in early June. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd bought a condo in downtown Minneapolis, a building with no HOA. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Her house sold quickly despite the drama. A young couple with a newborn, first-time home buyers, excited about the neighborhood. I helped them move some furniture in, and they seemed genuinely nice. They'd heard about the HOA issues but were assured things had changed. Besides, the husband said, our real estate agent told us this neighborhood has something special. She said people actually look out for each other here. We try, I said. By the end of June, life in Meadowbrook Commons had settled into a new normal. The pool opened for summer without incident. The 4th of July block party was the best attended in years. Kids played in the streets until dark. People sat on their porches and actually talked to each other instead of worrying about violations. I kept my jumper cables in my truck, and I kept helping people when they needed it. By my count, I jump-started vehicles 23 times between March and August. Not because I had to, but because that's what you do in a community that actually functions. In late August, I was working in my garage on a Saturday afternoon when a car pulled up. A woman in her 40s got out, walked up my driveway and introduced herself as Jennifer, Patricia Whitmore's sister. I wanted to apologize for what my sister put you through, she said. I heard about everything that happened. You don't need to apologize for her actions. I know, but Patricia has always been like this. She gets a little power and becomes impossible. It happened at her last neighborhood too. That was interesting. She had HOA issues before. She was forced to resign from her previous board in Eden Prairie after similar problems. I'd hoped she learned something, but apparently not. Is she doing okay? She's angry and convinced everyone else is wrong, which is pretty typical. But maybe this time she'll actually reflect on things. I'm not holding my breath, though. Jennifer left after a few more minutes of conversation. I felt a little sorry for Patricia, which surprised me. It must be exhausting to be that convinced of your own righteousness while everyone around you disagrees. September brought cooler temperatures and the start of fall. The neighborhood looked beautiful with changing leaves and decorated porches. The new board had organized a community garage sale that raised money for updated playground equipment. They'd also established a neighborhood assistance fund for residents facing temporary hardships, funded by voluntary contributions. In October, I attended an HOA meeting for the second time ever. This one was nothing like the February disaster. About 20 people showed up. Donald ran through the agenda efficiently. There was actual discussion, people disagreeing respectfully, decisions made by consensus. It felt like how these things should work. During open comments, I mentioned that several residents had older vehicles that might need more attention as winter approached. I offered to do a free battery testing day for anyone interested. Sarah Chen immediately supported the idea. That's exactly the kind of community-building activity we should encourage. How about the last Saturday in October? We settled on October 26th. I set up in the community center parking lot with my testing equipment. 27 people came by over 4 hours. I tested 32 batteries, found 8 that needed replacement, gave everyone honest assessments, and didn't charge a dime. Mrs. Henderson brought cookies and lemonade. Greg Martinez helped me organize the line and keep track of who'd been tested. The Ramirez kids drew chalk pictures on the pavement while their parents waited. It was one of the best days I'd had since moving to Meadowbrook Commons. November brought the first real cold snap, temperatures dropping into the teens overnight. I started warming up my truck again, 7 to 8 minutes depending on conditions. No complaints, no fines, just normal life. One morning in mid-November, I was scraping ice off my windshield when Greg walked over from his driveway. "Hey, Frank, question for you. How long should I be warming up my car? I know yours needs more time because it's a diesel, but I'm never sure with regular engines." "Depends on the temperature. Below 20 degrees, I'd give it 3 to 5 minutes. Let the oil circulate, get the engine temperature up a bit. It's better for the car and you'll have heat sooner." "Makes sense. Thanks, man. Anytime." He started to walk back, then turned around. "You know, none of this would have happened if Patricia had just talked to you like a normal person. If she'd knocked on your door and said, 'Hey, a neighbor mentioned your truck is loud in the mornings, can we figure something out?' you would have worked with her, probably. But control was more important to her than solutions. Well, thank God she's gone." As winter settled in properly, I found myself reflecting on the whole situation. 6 months earlier, I'd been angry, frustrated, and ready to fight. Now I was just grateful to live in a place where people treated each other decently. The situation had taught me some things about communities and human nature. Power, even small-scale HOA power, can corrupt quickly. Reasonable rules require reasonable people to implement them. And sometimes standing up to bullies costs money and stress, but it's worth it if the alternative is letting them win. In December, the neighborhood had a holiday lights contest. Participation was voluntary, judging was friendly, and the prize was a plastic trophy someone found at a thrift store. My house didn't win, but I didn't care. I just enjoyed walking around the neighborhood in the evenings, looking at lights, running into neighbors doing the same thing. On Christmas Eve, I was carrying groceries from my truck when I noticed Mrs. Henderson struggling with bags at her car. I walked over and helped her carry everything inside. Her house smelled like cookies and pine. "Thank you, Frank. Every year I swear I'm going to make fewer cookies, and every year I end up baking for 3 days straight. The neighborhood appreciates it, trust me. Oh, before you go, I wanted to give you something." She disappeared into her kitchen and came back with a plate of cookies covered in plastic wrap. "Chocolate chip, peanut butter, and those cherry things you liked at the battery testing day. Mrs. Henderson, you didn't have to do this. I know. But you helped me more than once this year, and not just with my car. You reminded me what actual leadership looks like. Standing up when it's hard, doing the right thing when it costs you something. That's worth a plate of cookies." I took them home and ate half of them that night while watching It's a Wonderful Life, which felt appropriate somehow. The new year arrived with temperatures cold enough to make your teeth hurt. -23 on January 2nd, which was brutal even by Minnesota standards. That morning, I counted 6 neighbors who needed jump starts. I spent 90 minutes going house to house with my cables, getting people started, checking batteries, giving advice. Nobody fined me for warming up my truck. Nobody complained about the noise. Nobody treated community standards like weapons. January 10th marked exactly 1 year since I'd received my first fine from Patricia Whitmore. I looked at the original letter, which I'd kept in a folder with all the documentation from that period. $20 for warming up my truck. Such a small thing that spiraled into neighborhood-wide drama, but it had also led to positive change. A board that actually listened. Rules that made sense. A community that felt like a community instead of a dictatorship. On January 15th, the anniversary of that first fine, I did something slightly petty but satisfying. I started my truck at 6 a.m. and let it idle for exactly 7 minutes, just like always. But this time, I sat in my living room with coffee, looking at the framed photo of my house that I'd taken last fall when the trees were perfect shades of gold and red. My phone buzzed. Text message from Greg. "Your truck sounds like freedom this morning, brother." I laughed and texted back. "It's just a diesel warming up." "Nah, man, it's the sound of someone who stood their ground and won. Enjoy it." Later that morning, Donald Parker called. "Hey, Frank, we're having a board meeting next week and we wanted to run something by you first. We're thinking about creating a neighborhood skills registry. Basically, a list of residents and what they're good at or willing to help with. You'd be our car guy, obviously. Sarah knows first aid. Linda Thompson is a certified accountant. Greg does website design. The idea is making it easier for neighbors to help each other and know who to ask." "I like it. Count me in." "Great. We'll put it together and distribute it in the next newsletter." "You guys are actually doing a newsletter now?" "Yeah, monthly. Sarah's husband does the layout. We're trying to keep everyone informed about what's happening." Novel concept, right? The skills registry launched in February and was immediately popular. Within 2 weeks, I'd gotten 3 calls from people I'd never met asking for car advice. I helped diagnose a transmission problem over the phone, talked someone through changing their oil, and spent an afternoon teaching a teenager basic vehicle maintenance. In March, Sarah Chen organized a neighborhood skills share day. People taught mini workshops about their expertise. I did one on basic car maintenance. Mrs. Henderson taught baking. A retired carpenter showed kids how to build birdhouses. Greg's wife, who was a yoga instructor, led a class in the community center. Over 150 people participated. It was chaotic and wonderful and exactly what Meadowbrook Commons needed. By April, I'd been living in the neighborhood for 4 years. I'd seen it at its worst and watched it become its best. The HOA was functioning properly now, handling legitimate issues, maintaining common areas, and staying out of people's lives unless necessary. I still drove my diesel truck. I still warmed it up every cold morning, and I still kept jumper cables ready for anyone who needed them. One afternoon in late April, I was washing my truck in the driveway when a car pulled up. A couple in their 30s, clearly house hunting, looking around the neighborhood. The woman rolled down her window. "Excuse me, do you live here?" "I do." "Can I ask what it's like?" The HOA, the neighbors, all of that. "We're looking at a house on Maple Street." I thought about how to answer. I could give them the sanitized version, or I could be honest. The HOA had some problems about a year ago. Leadership issues, unreasonable rules, typical horror stories you hear about. But the residents came together, fixed the problems, and now it's a genuinely good place to live. People look out for each other. The board is reasonable. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. That's honest. I appreciate it. That's the Meadowbrook Commons way now. At least, that's what we're trying to make it. They thanked me and drove off. I watched them stop and talk to Greg a few houses down, probably getting a second opinion. He'd tell them the same thing. In May, Donald Parker announced he wouldn't seek re-election as HOA president. He'd done his part, got things stable, and wanted to focus on his family and career. Sarah Chen decided to run, along with 2 other qualified candidates. The election was professional, issues-focused, and respectful. Sarah won and took office in June. Her first major initiative was establishing an emergency assistance program for residents facing unexpected hardships. Medical crises, job losses, house repairs beyond insurance coverage, the kind of things that could devastate a family. It was funded by voluntary contributions and administered confidentially. I contributed $200 and committed to helping with any vehicle-related needs that came through the program. The first request came in July. Single mother, 2 kids, her car needed a new alternator and she couldn't afford it. The part cost $180. I waived my labor, met her at a parts store to make sure she got the right alternator at a fair price, and installed it in her driveway while her kids watched and asked questions. She tried to pay me something, but I refused. The neighborhood fund covered the part. My time is free. Just help someone else when you can. She cried a little, thanked me about 15 times, and later sent a card with a drawing from each of her kids. That summer was peaceful. Pool parties, block parties, kids riding bikes, neighbors barbecuing and sharing food. The kind of suburban life that people imagine but rarely experience. In August, I helped jump-start Mrs. Henderson's Buick one last time. The battery finally gave up after years of faithful service. I drove her to the auto shop, waited while they installed a new one, and drove her back home. You know, Frank, I almost moved last year. During all that nonsense with Patricia, I seriously considered selling my house and going somewhere else. I'm glad I didn't. Me too, Mrs. Henderson. This neighborhood works because of people like you. People who do the right thing even when it's hard. I just warm up my truck and help with batteries. You do a lot more than that, and you know it. September brought cooler weather and a neighborhood meeting to discuss winter preparation. Sarah ran it efficiently, covering snow removal, holiday decorations, and community events. At the end, she opened the floor for comments. I raised my hand. I wanted to say something. A year and a half ago, I got fined for warming up my truck. It was stupid, it was unfair, and it made me angry. But it also led to all of us realizing we could do better. We could be better. So in a weird way, I'm grateful it happened. It showed us what we didn't want to be and gave us the chance to become what we wanted to be instead. The room was quiet for a moment, then people started clapping. Not loud or dramatic, just acknowledgement that we'd all been through something difficult and come out better for it. After the meeting, at least 10 people came up to thank me for speaking, for standing up originally, for not backing down. I accepted the thanks but deflected the credit. It wasn't just me. It was everyone who signed the recall petition, everyone who voted, everyone who participated in rebuilding the community culture. October brought the second annual battery testing day. This time, 39 people showed up. I brought an assistant, a teenager from the neighborhood named Marcus who wanted to learn about cars. He helped test batteries, take notes, and explain things to residents. Kid had a knack for it. You ever think about becoming a mechanic? I asked him during a break. Maybe. My parents want me to go to college. You can do both. Get an engineering degree, work on cars, combine them somehow, or just do whatever makes you happy. What made you become a mechanic? I like fixing things. I like the logic of it. Engine doesn't start, there's a reason. Figure out the reason, fix it, problem solved. I wish more of life worked that way, he laughed. Yeah, people are more complicated than engines. Much more complicated, but that's what makes it interesting. November brought cold and the start of another Minnesota winter. I resumed my routine of warming up the truck every morning. 7 to 8 minutes depending on temperature, just like always. The sound of my diesel engine idling became part of the neighborhood's morning rhythm again, along with coffee makers and shower sounds and garage doors opening. Nobody complained. Nobody fined me. It was just a guy warming up his truck before work. One morning in early December, I walked out to start my truck and found a note under the wiper blade. For a second, my stomach dropped, some reflex from the previous year. Then I unfolded it and read. Thanks for being the kind of neighbor everyone wishes they had. Your friend, Greg." I looked down the street and saw Greg backing out of his driveway. He waved. I waved back. That afternoon, I stopped at the hardware store and bought a better set of jumper cables. Heavy-duty, professional grade, the kind that would last decades. I put them in my truck next to the old set. Christmas came with snow and lights and the kind of cold that makes you appreciate a warm house and good neighbors. On Christmas morning, I woke up to find a basket on my front porch. Cookies from Mrs. Henderson, homemade jam from the Ramirez family, a gift card to the local coffee shop from Sarah Chen, and a card signed by at least 20 neighbors. Inside the card, someone had written, "To Frank, who taught us that sometimes standing up for what's right starts with something as simple as warming up your truck. Merry Christmas." I sat on my couch for a long time that morning, just thinking about community and connection, and what it means to be a good neighbor. It's not about following rules blindly or avoiding conflict at all costs. It's about treating people with respect, standing up when something's wrong, and helping out when you can. The new year arrived quietly. No dramatic celebrations, just the calm satisfaction of knowing I lived in a place that worked. The HOA functioned properly. The board listened. The residents participated. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. On the anniversary of the recall meeting, March 18th, Sarah organized a neighborhood dinner. Potluck style, everyone brought something, held in the community center with tables borrowed from a local church. Over 100 people came. Kids ran around playing tag. Adults talked and laughed and shared food. Mrs. Henderson brought her famous cookies. Greg set up a photo slideshow of neighborhood events from the past year. Marcus, the teenager who'd helped with battery testing, DJ'd music from his laptop. During dinner, Sarah stood up and clinked a glass for attention. "I want to say a few words. 2 years ago, this neighborhood was divided and dysfunctional. We had rules that didn't make sense and leadership that didn't listen." One person stood up and said this isn't right, even though it cost him money and stress. Frank Brennan reminded us that we have a voice and the power to use it. But more importantly, he reminded us what community actually means: helping each other, standing together, being decent human beings. So I want to propose a toast to Frank and to everyone here who believed we could do better. Everyone raised their glasses. I felt embarrassed and grateful in equal measure. And to Patricia Whitmore, Greg added with a grin, for teaching us what not to do. That got laughs. Even I had to smile at that one. The evening wound down around 9. People helped clean up, folded tables, swept floors. The community center looked better when we left than when we arrived. I drove home through streets lined with houses where people lived and helped each other and generally tried to do right by their neighbors. My neighborhood. My community. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 like always. Made coffee, checked the temperature, -15 degrees, and headed out to my truck at 6 a.m. I started it, heard the diesel engine rumble to life, and went back inside to let it warm up properly. 7 minutes later, I scraped the windshield, climbed into a warm cab, and drove to work. Just another morning in Meadowbrook Commons, Minnesota. No drama, no fines, no problems, just a guy warming up his truck, ready to help if anyone needed a jump start, living in a neighborhood that finally understood what community meant. And that, I thought as I pulled onto the highway, was exactly how it should be.